Hi everyone, it's Sally. I'm coming back on the casting on methods. Second video of the two, talking about closed cast on. Closed cast on, somewhat obviously being what it says on the tin. It means that the loops are firmly closed of your initial row and that your knitting cannot come unravelled from the bottom. So when do you need a closed cast on done on the flatbed machine? Well, it's if you haven't got any other kind of an edge to your finished garment. So you've got no ribbing, you've got no hem or any other kind of a trim. You need to have a firm edge that won't come undone. And this is where you would employ one of the closed cast on methods. I use it for things like shawls, bottom edges of scarves, sometimes blankets and stuff like that. Particularly if I'm going to be doing something like lace. We often don't have ribbing on the edge of a lace piece. If it's a wrap or a stole, we'd have a closed cast on edge. There's two main ways of achieving a closed cast on. One is to do an Ewrap or a variation of Ewrap, because there's more than one. Double Ewrap. I think there's a figure of 8 Ewrap as well as the basic Ewrap, and the other type is called a latch tool cast on or a crochet cast on, because you make a ridge of stitches on the stems of the needles using your latch tool. So let's demonstrate a couple of these. I won't do a huge number of stitches because I'd be here all day, because the disadvantage of a closed cast on over an open or a temporary one is it takes a little bit longer to achieve. So the first one I'm going to do is Ewrap. Again, I'm on my standard gauge machine. Let me just twiddle this slightly sideways. Yeah, I'm on my standard gauge machine and I'm using a UK 4-ply yarn, which is sock weight fingering. I'm going to be having the machine set at tension 7. No brushes in place, so my weaving brushes are up. What I do is I start off by making a slip knot at the end of the yarn, and you can work Ewrap in either direction, but you always start at the end opposite the carriage. So my carriage is on the right, so I'll start here on the left hand side, and I tighten up that knot around the last needle, pull down a surplus length of yarn, so I've got plenty to work with. And then Ewrap is got that name because it looks like you're writing the letter E, so working back towards the carriage. And the trick with this is not to get the wraps too tight or too loose. If it's too tight, particularly on a very wide piece of Ewrap cast on, the carriage won't be able to knit the stitches back. And if it's too loose, it will pop off the needles. So and when you get to the end, you take the yarn back to the carriage and pull the excess back through the overhead yarn mast, feed the yarn into the yarn feeder, close the gate, and then knit my first row. So there we go, that's knitted quite nicely. Now, I've lost it. If you are working on a plastic bed machine, you need to pull the needles forward to deposition on the next couple of rows. Just make sure that they don't jump off when you start knitting back. But if you know by now that I have an inordinate love for a ravel cord. If you have got a ravel cord, you can do exactly the same as you do with an open cast on and put the ravel cord between the sinker posts and the hooks of the needles. It's not in the hooks again, and just knit a couple of rows to secure that and pull the cord out. more, and we've got enough knitting there now to put the weights on. Just like that, and then carry on knitting. Hey presto. Simple as that. So break the yarn and take that off. And remove from the machine. Oh, there it is. So it's quite stretchy, but it won't come undone. Cannot unravel that. Won't come undone. So there's Ewrap cast on for you. Now in the first video I did talking about open cast on, I said sometimes you make an open cast on and do a few rows of waste yarn and then do your closed cast on over the top. Just in case you don't know what that means, I'll show that as well. And this, if you remember, is where you want to have a piece of waste yarn knitting to hang weights on, to give something stable for the machine to knit onto with your main yarn. Let's do a quick open cast on. Ravel cord. Pull that out. Hang weights. And I usually will then end up with the carriage on the left if I'm going to be taking it off afterwards. Oops. So it's a nice little piece of waste knitting there. If I was going to be moving on to the lace carriage, I'd make sure I do at least 20, if not 30 rows of waste. You can always rewind it up afterwards and you reuse it if you're worried about wasting yarn. So I break my waste yarn off. So I want to find my other ravel cord. There it is. You can see the divide. So this is where you knit one row in using the ravel cord and thread through the yarn feeder. We just better. Put the ravel cord through the yarn feeder, close the gate and knit one row across. And that is the separation row. Now for my main yarn cast on over the top, I'll pull all the needles out to D. Take my main yarn. I've got some red threaded up, and I would do the Ewrap cast on exactly as I did before. So make a slip knot in the end, put it on there, and Ewrap, so that the main yarn that I'm now doing the Ewrap cast on with is being cast on to the same needles that still have the ravel cord on. There we go. Pull the excess yarn back. Making sure again I've got good tension in the overhead wire. Feed it through the yarn feeder and then knit back. Now, because I've already got waste yarn and weights on here, I don't have to fiddle around pulling the needles out to D or anything like that. I can just carry on knitting. That's that done. Let's take this off. And remove from the machine, and there you can see that as white is my waste yarn, the green bit in the middle is the separation row knitted with ravel cord, and it's got a closed cast on the back. So if I get my ravel cord and pull it out, it should just pull straight out. There we go. And then there's two pieces of knitting come apart. Oops, almost my hand's gone. There they are. And that's my waist, the white one that I'm going to throw away. And there is my red with the Ewrap cast on edge. So that's how you cast on over the top of a separation row on waist. There we go. Oh, next one we will have a look at is double Ewrap. It's a little, do quite so many. It's a little bit firmer than the normal Ewrap, and not quite so stretchy. But still otherwise very easy to accomplish. Again, pull down a good length of yarn, make a slip knot in the end, and put that onto the end needle. Now I might move this a little bit closer. There we go. So I've now got a loop on that left-hand needle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the yarn up between needles 2 and 3, put it over needle 2 and into the open latch on the first needle and knit it back. So I've now got a knitted stitch on needle 1 and a loop on needle 2. And it's alright, I'm just checking to make sure. I think I've used the wrong bit of the yarn. Did I? No. So one of the first things you must make sure you're doing is knitting back with the bit that is attached to the cone rather than the tail. I'm not too sure I'd done that. Let me just do that again. So put the loop on the end needle, bring the, yes, I've got the right piece, bring the yarn up between needles 2 and 3, over needle 2, into the open latch on needle 1, and just making sure the latch is open, and then I'm going to knit that back. So there's a knitted stitch on needle 1 and a loop on needle 2. So then I go up between the next 2 needles, over the second one, into the open latch on the first, and just keep doing this all the way along. So and each time you're creating a loop on the second needle and knitting back through the first. And this is double Ewrap cast on. When you get to the end needle, you just knit through the loop. Again, you pull the excess yarn back over, feed that into the feeder. Now here I'm going to show you pushing the needles forward to D, which you'd need to do if you don't have sinker posts. But as I did with the first Ewrap cast on, you can also hold this one in place using ravel cord if you prefer. Knit that back. Once you've got a little bit of knitting on there, weights on. And you're away. There you go. demo from the machine. And there is your double Ewrap cast on. It's slightly more substantial than single Ewrap. Not quite as stretchy, but it's still pretty stretchy. Nice firm edge. That's a really good one to use for, particularly for heavier weight yarns. There we go. So there are lots of different variations of Ewrap that you can find on YouTube and in books and what have you. A particular one I do quite like is using multiple strands for the Ewrap edge, and you get this nice sort of like fancy edging. This was done with don't know, so long ago since I did it. I think it was two, if I unpick it, it was 2 strands of cream and 1 of orange, or ran the other way. But it was ultimately it was 3 strands of yarn that I used to Ewrap around the needles. And then if I was going to be a bit cautious about whether or not the carriage would knit that first row back, I might knit them back by hand, and then just carry on knitting as before. That could be quite a pretty edge. And that brings us then, last but not least, to the latch tool cast on, or crochet cast on. Well, I personally can't actually do this with the crochet hook. I need to have the latch hook in my hand, because I keep dropping the stitch otherwise. But some people might, if you're a proficient crocheter, you might be able to do it with a crochet hook. But what I've got here is I have got my latch tool, and I'm going to make a slip knot, which I will put onto the latch hook. So, and then I'll hold the tail in my hand, in handle, and so I've got this bit that's coming off the cone. And what you're going to do is come up between, again, you can do this in either direction, but I being right-handed, I find it easier to go from left to right. If you're left-handed, you might want to do it back the other way. And I'm going to come up between, get that out of the way, the first 2, hook the yarn round the hook and bring it back and go through the loop on the needle. And I push the latched hook well up so that the loop that's left on it is clicks below where the latch goes. Come down there and back up. You kind of feel it click in your hand. Click. And my success with this is all about getting the hook and the yarn held at the right angle. And then the last one goes on to the end needle. Oops, like that. And push those back a bit. I might have done them a little bit tight. But, tend to do this one a bit tighter possibly than Ewrap, because I definitely want it to be a very firm edge. So that's on there, and we're back. There we go. Again, you can pull all those needles forward. Oops. Or on a sinker post machine, you can hold them in place with the ravel cord like before. Entirely your preference. Again, once you've got a few rows on there, put weights on. And away you go. So there we have it. That is with a latch tool cast on. Gives a very nice firm edge, but as you can see, it's not as stretchy as the Ewrap one. So You wouldn't want to put that around the edge of something that you want to maybe stretch over if you're going to pull something on over your head, or up over your, if you've got a big fat bum like me, you want to do that either. So just have a wary eye on what you're going to be making and whether the opening needs to be able to stretch or not. But if you need a nice firm edge that doesn't need to stretch, then latch tool cast on is a good one to try. I think that's possibly about all I'd say about closed cast-ons. So I'll finish off this video now. If you've got any questions, then please let me know. Thank you.